What is this Matasio Lyles? Anybody know what? Anybody's roommate? Don't know what goes on with him?
No. He came in today in the afternoon, and I think he left.
He hasn't been around for a couple of afternoons, according to the people in his office.
I saw him at 2:30 today. Wasn't
2:30.
Yeah.
2:30 is nicht dahin and nicht daher. And also strokes, what's with him? Just don't hear or see.
Same thing.
Huh?
Same thing. There's an interesting virus with the bowel.
I think there's a stomach virus going on. A lot of people have been having problems.
It's a bowel virus.
I had it on
a bowel virus.
Well, so, I haven't had it, but for people.
I'm sorry. He hasn't been settled the whole week. So I'll keep up with these guys. It's like chasing needles in haystacks. Right.
Hemshek Samik Vav, Daf Kuf Ayin Ches. Today is Dalid be Menachem Av Hatashin Samik Ches.
Pashas the barn. Other.
So we saw that the Nefesh, despite the fact that Oifen Giluya is in Bedugmas Oya, after became the Nefesh is Mugdar, Alidei Yeridosi B'Techa Guf, that it's only shot to one Guf and it can't become a Mekeimes or become a Gufim B'Bas Achas. And therefore we brought the Rayaf in the Sipur of Eliyahu Hanavi, the Beisias man that he went to be Matzah Rav Manein Saba. He wasn't able to be at that man in the Idra with the Rashbi. And we were medactic to different diuchen that there are in that Maisa. And we saw, however, that there's a mile in the Indian of the Shemesh, in the Moshel of the Era Shemesh, that the Era Shemesh is Eina Mugdar. Shari Shemesh Meya Bekomoke, Beshove. We saw that it shines equally everywhere with the same header, with the same lack of his pilots Beklau. V'gam Puyo B'tzmochim. Different effects that the sun has. So the Shemesh does that all at one moment. It's not the taste that the Shemesh in any way is busy applying itself to this prat or to another, and it all happens with the Mamela, even though it's a form of poil b'hatzmochim, and that's what we saw. The diktuk was that even though it's poil b'hatzmochim, but it does it in an even of oil dafki, and even from a header ice piles, and without any hisaskus or any real relation of hislapshus in those inyonim, even though it's poil in them. It does it hakoil beloy hagdora. It's not limited in any place. It can be poil b'kolam akeimes b'shova. So we see then that we've moved in two sort of different directions. And mitzad echad, the Moshel of the Nefesh has got miles to it, in that it's Inyav and Davki Ritzini, like we saw the whole Gilad and Nefesh is Davki Barotzen, Mashenkim by the Shemesh, and then we've seen, however, Chesaron in the Moshel of the Nefesh, that it's Mugda Be'aguf, and that's a mile in the Era Shemesh, in the Moshel of the Era Shemesh, that it's not Mugdan, it's Poyo, B'kola Makeimes, or B'sha Achas, B'li Hagdola. So when we see that there's miles B'moshel Zeh, which is not in the Anamoshel. Now we go back the other way. Hine Hashemesh Muchrak Be'hagiluya. In other words, a lacking in the Indian the Moshel of the Shemesh is that the Shemesh is Muchrak Be'hagiluya. Ve'ein Zeh Tolei Be'bechiros HaShemesh. It's not totally whether the Shemesh makes a decision or mitzad its will, it decides and it chooses to give forth light. No, the light is compulsory. If there's a Shemesh, and there must be the union of light, shaloi b'tivus or b'bechiras HaShemesh. Well, Amayla eno shayach hechreichius chas v'sholem. Therefore, that's a morsel which is not so good in that prat. In other words, so in the morsel of Bulti Mugda, the Shemesh got a Maila, and therefore it's a morsel to the Inyanim Areala La Maila. However, Be'inyan Zeh, that it's Tavki Behechreichias, and it's compulsory from the Shemesh, and not Bechidose, and not Barotzen. In that regard, it's not Dima to the Inyan of the Nimshul, which is Elakus. So therefore, we see that in that particular part, there's almost, as you might call, a chisoron in the marshal of the Shemesh. Well, that particular mila, that particular inyan of not being behechreichias elatavke barotzen, ze moving me'anefesh, she'ena mukrak ba'gilim mimeno. And then we went on to discuss at some length last night the Indian the Moshe of the Gilgulim, or we saw that it's possible that in the Nefesh the Adam can be Malim Akwea Proti and cause it to be Salim altogether, even though it's a part or an essential part of the Gilui of the Nefesh of that particular Adam. Right? We saw by Avram Avinu that he's called the Isha Chesed, and he's whole Indian is Chesed. So therefore the Gilui HaChesed by Avram Avinu is a very essential part of the Gilui of Nafshei. Nonetheless, we saw that when it came to the Akedah, he was able to be Malim, the Indian of Chesed altogether, Bizman HaAkedah, that it should be Misalim B'teich HaNefesh, and he was Megala another midah altogether, the Indian of Urais, but that indicates that it was Bekoichoi to be Mishtalit after the Oifanim of the Giloim, yes, that it's all Indian of Rotzainiyas, it's all Tolu in the Rotzen of the Odom. And therefore, even though the Nefesh appears to be in an even of Gilui B'derech Mamela, and it is. The truth of the matter is, it is B'derech Mamela. Nonetheless, it's also got the Maila that it's be Rotzen Ha'odam. So in that part, it is Doima to the Inyanim Ha'dayala L'Maila. And that's what he says, Shea Poel Kediboy. Had it not been possible for him to be Malim altogether, the Midas Ha'ava on B'nai Yechidoi, then there wouldn't have been the possibility of the whole Akedah in the way that we required it. Meaning that it's an Indian Ikri or Shroshi, as you might call it. It's like an important root Indian in the Indian of Avram Avinu B'Klal. It was within his capacity completely to hide that or to cause it to go into a state of potentiality, not begoli b'klal. Muvan shagili uri 20 years from that. It's mashma that all the revelations from the nefesh, afila the ike inyonim, afila the inyonim, which tend to be the basic characteristic of the adam, all of them are tolo in the inina arotzen etzloi. And therefore the Rebbe puts in imi yesh she'enanu magishim she'agilui krechas ativim ein barotzen dafke mikol mokim mashe biyochelti lahalim muvan she'agilui hu barotzen dafke. That's basically I think we were holding. That we saw, even though we're not openly aware of the fact, we don't live with an awareness of all the giluim of the nefesh are barotzen. We don't feel the whole time that we're being machlit and we're being oil b'ratzainoi to kol echad v'echad to give forth the giluim of the nefesh. It's not b'haragosha. But we can see from the fact that we can, if we want to be completely malim a certain koyach, then from that we see that everything is davke b'rotzen, even though that rotzen may not be in our awareness called kach. In Mamela, that's the Maila of the marshal of nefesh, umikol machim, even though it's Baratzen hu b'derech mamela. In other words, that those two svaras are not they're not contradictory one to the other. Despite the fact that it's b'derech mamela, nonetheless it could be still being in it's still Gilui Ritzonius, even though we say b'derech mamela. The canal, as was mentioned above, the Chai Mamela Misna Naya. That a living Indian b'derech mamela moves or give forth movement, and we saw that that's loyally they tilde visachkes. It's not that he's preoccupied to give forth movement or that he's busy with that. It's only a luminescence bilvad. Lochein hu shaloi alidei tilde visachkes. And it's not that he's busy to give forth if we look carefully, we see that throughout this last section we've gone, as it were, from one point to the other, and we've established it really to bring forth the whole understanding of how inyonim of Huyer are, on the one hand, b'derech mamela, and they're not alidei, which means that they're not alidei hisaskas. However, they can be davke b'rotzen, and the amitis inyan of Lamaila Kamuvan is davke b'rotzen. Everything Lamaila is b'rotzen. We can see that there's two musholim, and that the two musholim are mashlim one the other. The mashi is b'zeh, ein b'zeh. Therefore, we showed on each time how we say that the inyan, the chayas nefesh, coming as it does from the nefesh, well, that's got certain indications of being davke b'derech mamela or alidei saskes. However, it's got a drawback of mugdar. It's davke in the guf. It can't be b'guf acher. The moshe of the shemesh has got certain chisreinas, but it has milas in the sense that it's not mugdar. However, the drawback of the shemesh is that it's davke behechreichias. It has no choice but or. It's b'rotzonius. However, even though it's b'rotzonius, it's not a still to the fact that it's b'derech mamela. And therefore, we've shown how each mashal is not perfect, and therefore, davke we can establish the case for the nimshal, and we'll be able to move into the nimshal, davke alidei, a combination of the two mashalim. What one is not full in it, the other one covers, and what one is lacking in, the other one has a more applicable aspect to itself, to the Indian how it is Lamaila. And therefore, davke b'tziruf shnei amashalim, it's possible to go to them. What we're going to do now, we're going to take out Isla Lamaila. But that's an interesting Indian, the one we saw just now, that even though something is borotzen, it's not in an even of adidei tilde visaskas. Rotzen and b'derech mamela don't necessarily disturb one the other. So I might have thought that if everything he produces, all the Giluim from a certain Indian are only when he wants it, then that tends to indicate a certain commitment to the Indian, a certain busyness that it's not going to really work unless he wants it. Well, that might tend to indicate a Indian, how to call it, tilde or preoccupation or beishu Indian of his slapshus or tfisa. Maybe the word tfisa might apply well to that. And therefore he stresses that that's not necessarily a difficulty or a steer one to the other. That you can have the shoirish and the etzim, what you might call arousal of the whole gilu is davke alidei rotzen. Ubeli rotzen, it just wouldn't be there. But that doesn't mean to say that he has to be misasik for mutrad b'zeh. It can still go from him b'derech mamela. So I mean that's an interesting nakuda, was it? Because that demands a certain hisboneness, how v'eich u'mazeh. If I want, then I'm busy, or I'm sort of committed. So therefore he stresses in the brackets that we don't really feel the rotzen of the nefesh. What that to a certain extent makes it, on the one hand, easy to understand why it's b'derech mamela, not b'derech hisaskes. Or on the other hand, it makes it a little bit more difficult to understand how is it b'rotzen. If we don't really feel the rotzen, then how is it b'emes b'rotzen? L'chera rotzen is a a will, and a will is something that has a point where it begins and it expresses itself. If we don't really begin to express ourselves and say, listen here, nefesh, you've got to produce, then it's hard to understand how it's parotzen. But nonetheless, so the Rebbe we see from the Heipach, that way you can withdraw, you're not allowed to, that you have ultimately a control over the gilui of your nefesh. And therefore we saw how we learned the pshat in the Inif and Gilgulim, that Kili you can withdraw the whole klolos achayis literally and not allowed to go because you're in a place where you don't want that to have any kesher or want it to have any iskala. Even though there are other places in Siddur where the Indian of the Gilgulim is learnt differently. I mean, this is one to how we're approaching the whole Indian from Gilgulim. But there are drushim, even with the Rebbe and Nishma Satan, where it appears that we learn the Indian of the Gilgulim slightly differently. But however, we have enough on our heads at the moment. There's dai bekaktis to be mo'era, that prat. However, we could say that why is it that the Indian of Rotzen and B'derech Mamela don't necessarily disturb one another? Well, that's what we learned earlier in the Hemshech. And we've seen on many occasions that Rotzen is a Indian Atzmi. Rotzen is not a thing which comes b'derech shefa. It's not something which comes b'derech slabshas in kelim, or even has kelim. It's even shayat to kelim. The Indian for Rotzen is a Indian makifi which is poyo b'kol ha'odam, b'kol inyonav, b'kol keicheso b'shava, being as it is what we called earlier in the Hemshech hatoyes hayetem. It's like the leaning for, I don't know if any of you guys in this class were there when we learned Pasha Vayero, but over there we learned the whole Indian. Our Rotzen is what's called hatoyes hayetem. And if the whole Indian from Rotzen is a muvdal from prote hagiluyim legamri, and on the contrary, it prompts them and pushes them, and it has the ability to express itself is immediately, and with equality, it's not limited in any, it's not trying to say that Rotzen has got any kli. Come over in Derech Mitzvah and Hilchos Tzitzis, but the Rebbe is masber over there when they get to Machshava, but it's pointed out in certain dushim that that's all shy to the union of Rotzen. Machshava and Rotzen are sometimes equal one to the other in certain inyanim. However, so I just say Davki because Rotzen is such a dova hamuvdal, and therefore it doesn't really interfere with anything. It's not really shy to. It doesn't really express itself in any of the clay nefesh or any of the inyonim of the nefesh. Only whenever the nefesh needs to really show control or want something, or how they might call want to be makar of something to itself, then it calls on the inyan harotz. And therefore, it's possible for the Rotzen to be b'poyel, and yet the Adam won't really be tremendously aware of it because it's not really shayat to all the clay haguf. And there was the Rebbe, there is a zasot Rotzen which is so muvdal and it's so beyond and so not shayat. You don't even feel that it's working, but it's so nageya that it's nageya to whether there will be gilui or not. Or if it doesn't interfere with the Eichah gilui, it's not really shy. That's not its business. How does the gilui really work? And therefore we say that in this particular case the gilui works b'derech mameh. But that doesn't interfere, and it doesn't in any way be koveya what the Rotzen can relate to that, or how the Rotzen's going to relate to it. Therefore the Rotzen dafki relates in the sense that it says, I'm the balabas, when are you going to be miskala? Well, once you are miskala, that's your business. Then you do it yours. So then the nefesh does it in an even from ha'ora bilvad, not in the way of a koyach. Alright, so we go now to understand how all these inyonim, v'adugma mikol zeh, the dugma from all these protei hamisholim, both in the nefesh of the Adam and the chayes nefesh, and the inyan of the shemesh, Yuvan Lamaila Mashanika Oyer. I will see, we'll be able to understand that inyan Lamaila which is called Oyer. Shazo Pchinas Ha'ora Lavad. It's only a luminescence from the Atzmas She'ein Boi Mina Etzem Klal. In other words, not that the actual etzem of the essence of the etzem enters the Oyer. V'lochein, and due to that fact, ein poil shum shinui v'spilus klal. It doesn't cause any change or any interaction or any effect within the etzem. V'ein ha'etzem nitvas u'mislabish bozeh. And therefore that implies also that the etzem is not caught in any way, or he doesn't enter into the rotzen like a lavush. Into the oil, like a lavush. She'eino mutrad v'eino mugdar chas v'sholim. He's not preoccupied or in any way what you might call defined or limited by the going forth from the etzem of the oil. Shehu gili b'derech ma meila. Yeah, so there we are. It's a Indian. It's got all those miles. Einam poel shum shinui, einam moisiv, einam megareya, einam. It's got nothing to do with his pilers, and there's no preoccupation or tfisa, any of those concepts in the etzem to give forth the oil. So that's all the Inyan, how we saw them in the Mushalim, and now we're taking them into the Inyan how it is Lamaila. And he says, Shehu Gili Shabbaderach Ma, Eina Mutrad V'Eina Mugda Chas V'Sholim, Shehu Gili V'Derach Ma, Meila, it just goes on its own self, as it were, without any deliberate production, as you might say, of that oil on the part of the Atzmut. You might think him Cain that Lamaila it's like the Shemish. In other words, there's no hatroda, no Indian on the part of the Shemish to produce the oil, but it always has to be there. On the contrary, that helps us to say that the Shemish is not mutrad, because it just goes b'derech ma. Therefore, we come back to the inner we saw in the nefesh. Imi yeshehu gilira tzaini yes davke. It's davke invan. Rotzen cholila v'chas to say that anything goes off from the Eibush to believe Rotzena that would just happen, but everything, even the highest revelations from the Eibush, albeit they don't affect him, and he's not mutrad and not nitras and not mislabish, nonetheless that dafke b'Rotzenoi. Mikol mokim agilu b'derech ma. Just like we saw in the Moshel of the Nefesh, and this is where the Nefesh is an exact Moshel in this particular part, that the two Inyanim don't contradict one the other, that the Inyan of being deliberate and Barotzen doesn't disturb the concept of B'derech Mamela. And for the reasons that we just pointed out, that the Inyan of Rotzen is a Dover Muvdal Lagamre from any of the Protim, and even though it's Puyo, it's got its own clothing of being poiled dafke b'avdola. So therefore it can be moved off from all the other inyanim, and yet nonetheless it can still interfere, as you might say. So therefore it interferes to produce the whole concept, that there should be oil. But Li Rotzen Klal, it's not going to be. But once it is, then it goes. But Mela, as like we saw the Havdola of the Rotzen from Shari HaInyanim and Shari HaDvorim. Mamira, that's a very interesting, nuance of two almost seemingly interfering type concepts, one with the other, and yet after these Bonan as Bo'imikadov, you said they're not really say so one the other, that it's B'derech Mamela, and yet it's Tafke B'Rotzen. But by the Shemish, that's a Nishdo. By the Shemish, the B'Mela implies that that's the way it is. It just has to be that way, just by definition. And that's one of the ways you can touch the word Mamela. After we say, no, it's Tafke B'Rotzen. And Mamela, that's the only way we can really be miyashiv those two inyanim together, the way I just explained. The Inyan Rotzen is mamish, a very high gilui, or Inyan of the etzem itself, and it's b'havdola mikol advarim. Therefore, it's puyo b'kol inyanim b'li isaravas in the way those things actually function mitzadatma. Omnam, he says, hu gilu ha'etzem. Oh, so now omnam means back the other way. If the etzem is not nislabish, and the etzem is not nitvas, and it doesn't affect the etzem, v'ein shinui, and there's no spilers, then I might have thought that it's just a thing that goes off from the etzem, but ein b'zem etzem klal, and kila there's no representation of the etzem inside the inside the Ur. So there is Omnom. The truth is, Hu Gilui Ha'etem. That even though it's only Ibrahim Mamera, and it's not Islam, all those Inyanim, nonetheless, he said it is a Gilui of the Etem, and it is Lefi Oifan Ha'etem Mami. He said it's Lefi Oifan Ha'etem. Well, we're going to see links with this concept that we saw earlier at great length in the previous Drusha concept of Ur Me'ain HaMo'er, the Ur being, as it were, taking in itself and expressing in itself essential characteristics of the Mo'er. And here we say that it's Lefi Oifan of the Etem. So once again, when you say it's Lefi Oifan, then you mean it has in itself the same manners almost as the Etem, but you don't mean to say that it is the Etem. It's just a revelation which expresses certain things of the Etem, how we might call appropriate to the way they are in the Etem. Although not that it is a min ha'etem, it's only Lefi Oifan ha'etem. And we're going to see that Lefi Oifan carries in itself that idea of being not Toifus the Etem, but at the same time as carrying in itself certain important inyonim which are achmiyim in the Etem. Therefore, we use for the moment the expression Lefi Oiver. And he said that's the mile that we have in Oyer and we don't find in Shefa. Why? The Ashpur doesn't go the way it is in the Etzem of the Mashpia, because he has to first of all be metamtum himself, and then he has to completely withdraw from the way he understands it. He has to find a way to give over that's going to go into the Makabel. So by the time it reaches the Makabel, it's not really how it is by him at all. We saw commission is boil the yield, but Moshel the Ashpur Sarah. Ela Talmud be Indian. So we saw there has to be almost a physical kishorim in the mensch to get himself together, that he should be able to find ways to bring things down to simple Talmidim. Harinin ha'etza eich umal hashpia harizeu shemishtana hashpah. Well, that indicates that the whole hashpah alters in its nature. It's mishtana mikamoishu eitzola. That's right, from the way it is by the mashpia him. So, and the whole reason it has to change, and the whole reason it has to be different the way it goes out than it is by him, is in order that it should be ba'oifen. It's got to come down into a way. So here we see then that the word oifan, manner, is being used for the sake of the kabel. Here the hashpur has got alter, and it's got to go down in such a way that it'll be Lefi Oifan Amish kabel. In Oyer, we say that the Oyer is Lefi Oifan HaMokeh, Lefi Oifan HaMoyer. So we see that the Lefi Oifan is at the two different extremities, meaning that the Oyer is not in any way a shinui or any way. The Oyer just, whatever it can do, it just gives over what the Etzem is. For Ela, the whole even Ashpur, by the time it reaches the Talmud, it's really for the sake of the Talmud. It's really the Talmud's in him, and it's not how it is in the Mashpia at all. So therefore, the Lashon Oifan applies to the Makabel, not the Mashpia, Mashenken in Oyer. So therefore he says, Eich L'mal Ashpia, that the Ishtanas is Shetiskabel El Makabel. Aval Oyer, Hari Hu Gilu Ha'etzem, Kamoy Ha'etzem, Mamish, it's a Gilui of the Etzem, and it's Kamoy the Etzem, Mamish. Now that expression, Mamish, we have to, of course, realize that once again the Ur Sokolosov is not really a Emersa Gilui of the Etzem, Kamoy, and other Drushim here in some above, later on in the Emsha. He points out that you can't really say that the Ur is Mamish a Gilui of the Etzem. It's also just a horrible Vavein, as they call Erech El Etzem. Of those inyonim, what the Etzem has, which can be expressed in Oyer and do go forth in Ha'ora, they go Kamoy Shahim. In other words, not that the Shpia alters them at the beginning and then they come Lefi Oifan, but the way they are in their variability, Eitzel, Haschola Sa'inin, Dahainu Ha'oyer, Eich Shuhu, Gilei Ha'etzem, that's the way they go. V'lachein, Ha'oyer hu gam kein b'chinas ein sof. And therefore we saw in the previous, at the end of the previous Maimah, since the oyer is a gilui mamish at the etzem, and it's mi ein o etzem, or lefi oifen o etzem, and therefore just like the etzem is ein sof, so the oyer is also ein sof. And that was all pure we had in the Lashon oyer ein sof, that the expression ein sof is referring to the oyer, not to the etzem, because you can't really call the etzem ein sof. V'chol ma sheyesh b'hamoya yesh bo oyer gam kein lefi shehu me'ein hamoya. Here we come back to the word me'ein. In other words, that now we're bettering our language, because when we said before lefi oifen, we're only using that in a relative sense to compare the two things of shefa and mashpia. Shefa and mashpia and oyer. So we say over there the lefi oifen is really much lower down in the makabel. Came up here, the lefi oifen is in the etzem gilui from the mashpia himself, or from the moya rather himself. Now once we come to the maskana sahinim, we come to the finality. So then we say that really the amitis Indian of oyer is kol mashi yesh b'moya yesh ba'oyer. Why? Because it's me'ain. We saw that the Indian for me'ain means not just similar and not just lefi oifen, but partaking in itself certain inyonim of the etzem. Now why do we say certain inyonim? Because that's for sure that the amitis etzem remains mudal even from the oyer. I mean the oyer's so only a ha'ora bilvad. And the amitis ha'atzmus is mudal b'tachas avdolah from all inyonim. I feel the oyer. Over that, what the atzmus does allow to go in the oyer, then that goes b'kol shleimusay, and it's me'ain hamoyer. That's never lost, despite the fact that the oyer is never really mamish agili of the etzem in a full sense. However, Sokosov, it does carry some of the essential characteristics of the moyer. One of them is the sinyan of ein. That's what we saw also in the maskana in the previous Maimah.
How can we say kol ma sheyesh b'hamor?
That's what I just pointed out. I pointed out that that's not what he means to say is that not everything that's in the moya comes into there. But we've already established clearly that you can't really say that, because the moya remains a petatas avdolah from its ha'ora. So far, is only a ha'ora. What we mean to say is that all of those inyonim that can express themselves, all those inyonim in the moya which are shayat to gila alidei ha'ora, they all go. In other words, that there's no, whatever the mashpia gives, he gives it k'moshehu. Mashing over there, he doesn't really at all. He only gives it in a way that it's going to be for the makabel. Over here, everything which is there, in other words, put it this way, everything we have to sell, we sell. You follow? We don't have to sell everything. Everything we do have to sell, then we sell. You got the idea? Those are the people. Later on, in a Maimah not very far from here, I mean, I don't know if we're going to reach these Maimah, because they're yards of learning from where we are, but later on in Adam Ki Akriv, it's not all that far away, the Rebbe's Masbih, that whole point that the union of Atzmus Lamaila and the oyer B'tachas Avdolah Zeh Mi Zeh, even though we say that the oyer is Mein HaMoyer. V'zeu HaTam, the fact that the oyer is Me'ein HaMoyer, and whatever the moyer allows to go into the oyer goes b'shleimas, because the ha'ora is mamish megale the moyer. That is the time asher b'yichilas ha'oyer lahaves. Well, that's what we saw earlier. The etzem creation, more than the creation, the etzem bringing into being of the whole ilamus. Well, that's the idea of lahaves. Well, that goes dafke through the oyer, as we've done this boil here, but diva maskov vayel chavayis hayam. That was the moment that we learned before. But the Rebbe was married over there, that according to our maskona, which is the shitta of the Alter Rebbe, that not that the atzmis himself is the actual mave. There's another madrega between the yisaves and the atzmis, and that's called the oyer. In other words, the holiday said we're marvir kama miles, as we pointed out in the last Maimah. However, the oyer being as it is a gila of the moyer, and it has in itself that Indian of immediate gather of Ein Sof, how it is in the Moya, and therefore it's able to mamish be mahava mi'ayin. Yes, it can actually bring about the actual Isavas of the Nivroim. The Isavas Trichadiyah Mepinus Ein Sof Davke. Well, that's what we pointed out, that the term Ein Sof in its milas implies even the ability to be mahava yesh mi'ayin. As we pointed out, the Barichas in the previous Maimah, the milas that there are in the Lashon Ein Sof. And therefore he said that it's Davke Mishu who Baal Ha'Ein Sof, somebody who hasn't himself the immediate Indian of Ein Sof, Davke he's able to be Mahava, and therefore since the Oyer is Ma'ein Amoyer, and the Oyer hasn't himself the Indian of Ein Sof, he now Oyer Le'yesh Prinas Ein Sof Mamish, Mipnei Shehu Ma'ein Amoyer, Lochem Bichel Tila Havish, therefore Davke the Oyer can bring about the Etzema Yisavas. Like we didn't want to say, according to the Alter Rebbe, that the Atzmus himself is mamish the mahave. We want to say it's Davke through the medium of something which is only a ha'ora mimeno, and that's the Indian of the Oyer. But being as it is, me'ein hamoyer, because there's dovuk in the moyer with the whole arigas that we learned over there, and therefore it's able to be mahave and to be literally boire yesh me'ai. Omikol makim nikra habriya yesh me'ayin. So what's the mikol makim? Ikum is that the oyer is a very important factor in the whole thing. The davke the oyer is mahave. And if the oyer is mahave, then the oyer is kilo the eibster, the meat is amatiyah. And why we say that the briya is yesh me'ayin. So he said, "Dahainu me'ayin vo'efes." Commotion is the word ayin means mamish nothing, absolute naught. Yeah, liyos racha ora levad v'lo etzem klal. Hariyu b'chinas ayin vo'efes legabi ha'atzmas. Even we are both in yonim. Like we saw, that was the great uftu of the Alter Rebbe. The mitzad echad we have another entity which is not the atzmas, which actually carries out the isavas. If it's another entity which carries either stock the emes or mechutten, as you might say, it's got all the inyanim of the atzmas. After we say yesh me ayin, what yesh me ayin implies the yesh misava, the yesh gashmi comes about from the ayin. And so he points, how can you call it ayin? I mean, that's the meat is Indian from Gilead Ein Sof and Gilead Atzmas in the oil. So we say no, because the oil in its very essence is ayin. It's ayin for ayin whatever. It's oral levad below etzem klal. Ariyu b'chinas ayin whatever legabi ha'atzmas. It's absolute nothing compared to the atzmas. And therefore, it's right, and it makes good sense to say yesh me ayin. So therefore, we saw that according to all those what you might call arrangements and all those hierarchies in the different ways of appreciating the Indian for Oyer Kalapi Atzmas, we get out of all the Inyanim. On the one hand, we avoid saying that the Atzmas was the very Mahava. On the other hand, we get out of the problem that it's yesh me ayin, because it is ein nachanami, even it's a koyach ha'atzmas, but it's ayin legabei favuas, because it's only a ha'ora bil. We see then that by using all those mishalim to produce the nimshal of the oyer, then we get to the issue of all the different sides in the bringing about of all the elements and the savas kol ha'inyonim v'kol ha'ilamos v'kol ha'nivroim. Mitzad the fact that on one hand it's yesh mei ayin, it's ayin v'efes l'gabi atzmusay. Mitzad ha'sheni me'ein ha'etem. So we see what a wondrous and what amazing idea, what an amazing hamtzah the Alter Rebbe was and what he placed in this whole concept of oil, which is so common in the Lashon of the Mekubalim. And with that, he not only was miyashiv the taich of the word oil, but he was miyashiv the whole problem, how all the different sfaras and all the different kashias that occur in the great Mekubalim, how do they all reach their yishuv, and dafka alidei, the inter-application of the different oifanim in that moshel of ha'ora and oil legabi etzim. With that, the Alter Rebbe answers all the inyan. And so that's what we see. Ubechina zu, Ibechinas Mokelo Elamas, Adavke that Indian of Uir, which is only Ha'ora, and it's Ayin, Lagabi the Atzmas, however, it carries in itself the Koyach of the Atzmas, well, that is the Mokke for the Elamas, V'loi Bechinas Atzmas Mamish, or not Atzmusay Mamish, Kedas HaPardes, like we saw over there, Barichas, that the Pardes, he holds that the Atzmas, he's Mamish, the Shurish of the whole Bria. And that, albeit over there, the Pardes, he uses the expression that the Eibush is a Sibba, and he's what's called the Sibba HaRishoyna, he's called the first great cause, as the Pardes calls him. However, the Alter Rebbe didn't want that, because he doesn't want the Atzmas to be Nitvas Klal, even B'derach Sibba, in of the Yisavet. However, he said, if we learn the way that we just learned, that there's another entity, Kiro, between them, B'derach Ayin Vo'evus, but nonetheless Me'ain, then you get out of the whole problem. So he said, therefore we don't have to say like the Indian of the Pardes, Ki Atzmus Eina Begeda Mokia and Afilu Sibba Alha Alo Ilames or Lo Ilames or Alo Ilames Ki Im Ubchina Sibbas Kola Sibba. It's the Sibba of all the Sibbas, and we point out that a Sibba is a dover Rochik, it's a in which has no direct hislapshus or direct hamshocha towards the door which it's causing. However, the Pardes avoid some of the problem by saying that there is a Sibba HaRishoyno. But by saying Sibba HaRishoyno, he means that it's the first in line which produces the whole Yisava. So therefore the Alter Rebbe says you can't say that about the Atzmas. What you can say about the Atzmas is that he's Sibbas Kol Ha-Sibbas. You can say he's a Zoi Vait, that he's like all the other Sibbas, which of all, he's called a Sibba, but he's not really directly involved in any of the Inyonim. It's only just that Sof Kol Sof, everything somewhere or another had to derive from him, whatever he's called Sibbas Kol Ha-Sibbas, but that's in even Nichuk, V'Avdola, Gemura, Mashenkin, by the Pardes, is the fact that he calls it Sibba Rishoyna indicates that it's got some sort of a kesher and a kiruv, like we saw Barichas in the Maimar HaKoydim, which I don't know if you guys remember anything from one Maimar to the other, but that's what we did learn over there. And Mamela, that's what we say in the Tikkun Zoya every Friday. What we have in the Posek Eliyahu, what he says, Antus Ilas Ha-Ilois Vasibas Ha-Sibas. And he says the Eibush says Ilas Ha-Ilois and the Inif and Sibas Ha-Sibas. So it's brought down and considers that Ilas Ha-Ilois doesn't mean Tadinif and Shefa. Or sometimes we call it Mamali Kolami. That Ilas Ha-Ilois and Ila and all will have a direct kesher, and they are slavish one in the other, and they go b'derach pool of one klape the other kiddur. Therefore that's called Ilas Ha-Ilois. Ve'ilos Sibas Ha-Sibais, or that's an Indian Betachas Ha-Avdola, or Einlas they call Tfisa or Islapshas or Yachov or Kiruv Klal, and we call the Eibishter in a very different way Sibas Kol HaSibais, in the sense that Tzokol Sok the Ha'ora does come from him. Yes, so therefore in that regard the Eibishter is the source of everything, but he's not the actual Mokia for the elements Begola. So therefore he says Mokia lo elements Ki Hu B'chinas Sibas Kol HaSibais V'Mokia lo elements Hu B'chinas Oyer Ein Tzei. The Mokia for the elements is what we call was this intervening entity, which we call the Oyer Ein Tzeif, Shu Gamkein Ein Tzeif, Upinsa Ora Levad Mina Atzmez. Therefore, it can be called, at least in a distant way, Ainu from Mokia to the elements, even that the truth is really only a Sibba, as we're going to see. But it's also upon him, at least, where we can say that the elements derive not from the Atzmas, because that's only a Ha'ora Levad, and therefore it's not of any reference ultimately to the Atzmas. Umikol Mokim, even the Isavas, Sha'er Mahave, Hurapchinas Sibba. As we point out, so even there we have to say the Inif and Sibba, because the way that the Oyer creates is in a way of Avdola. Even though the Oyer brings about but it brings about in the form of a havdola levad. And therefore he said the eres mahavara p'chinas siba the hiliyos p'chinas mokia mamish lahaves zeh shayah p'chinas shefa davke shehu p'chinas tvis ve'yislabshes avo p'chinas oir liyos p'chinas gilu ha'etzem ein abo p'chinas tvis ve'yislabshes ela hu p'chinas siba bilvad ela oilameres Mashu b'chinas mokev b'chinas kiruv hu b'derech klau oir sha'acha hatzimtzum or b'derech prat hu b'chinas shefa. Here we see that we're now coming to a very interesting maskona, and we're leaving the two concepts of oir v'shefa in a more particular form of definition, and we're ending up with the inyan of an oir being always a state of dollar. And that oir is always muvdal, and the reason for that is that oir is gilui ha'etzem. And that's what we talk about oir ha'metzumtzam lafi erech ha'olam. We call that oir, really we mean with that shefa, sof kol sof. Yeah, that's called be'ikah, that's called shefa. Why? Because that's already a inyan metzumtzam, and it comes and it's mislabish, and it's bekiruv, and it's mislabish in the inyan of the olam. Therefore, it's called the inyan shel shefa, not the immediate inyan of oil, even though it's a form of derivative from the also because it was not the immediate inyan of oil. So now it's a very fascinating concept, and he sends you up to I mashkos lekamon diva masko odom ki yeah. Well, that's not odom ki akut. That's even further. That's quite a way down. The himshah is in Miyudah. After his galus melech HaMashiach, and we can sit under a big fig tree or a big how do you call it, vine in Yerushalayim, in Chutzes Yerushalayim. We can learn the inyan from Adam Ki Yeh Be'er Be V'Sorei V'Chulei was one of the really difficult minors in the whole of the Hemshech and so forth. What is more difficult than this? All I can suggest is that this is just a warmer-upper. This is a warmer-upper compared to certain moment they occur about the middle of the whole sefer, but they're really pretty mind-shooting and mind-boggling, and then it gradually begins to sort of tone down somewhat to more, inverted commas, approachable inyanim. So, the Rebbe says that the inyan of oil always remains b'avdola, and therefore, even though it's the immediate source of the nivroim, but it's not the source, but there are kiruv, but it's b'derech siba. What? Either the source, but there are kiruv, this is the inyan of shefa. What's the shefa? So without verstehen, what you do, what is it tight? That you have two different, as it were, sources. There's a source b'derech siba, and there's a source b'derech shefa. That's b'derech richuv, and there's b'derech kiruv. Where do we find dvarim kela? Why do we say that? Where do we find it? This is ma'ir atifa is boniness. Wushi do is. And we're going to see tomorrow night, we'll finish off the little piece called Pikola now. We're going to see in the Sikum of the Dvarim, the Rebbe says it even more clearly in what he says. Here, there's like two inyanim. There's a inyan from Siba of a derech Rikuk, and there's a inyan from Kiruv, and both of them are mokia. So you have to work out in your mind which one is really the mokia. We're tight. So therefore, if we examine, and being as is the night of Hey Menachem Oil, well, tonight is the night of the so-called, in inverted commas, Hishtalchus or the Rizal. What did you close the sefer? I don't allow anybody to do that on me, my son. Nobody closes the sefer until I finish the shir. If I finish the shir, we close the sefer. Now, Nimtzurov, he said that it's a door rowy to be mefalpo in Taminin and Pnim Satira, at least b'derech chalishes al-chofonim v'ezes u'even, being as it is Hey Menachem is what all these these inyonim probably wouldn't have made it to this point if not their Rizal. He's like the Koyach Otzim, and he's like the unbelievable Iskalas, through which all these inyonim came and were nimsha. But if we look at the whole inyan Yesh Mi'ayim, we find this Mavura in Drush Chassidus that Yesh Mi'ayim has gotten itself two inyonim, which are almost like we see here. They're almost like two absolute contrasting inyonim. And that is that on the one hand, Yesh Mi'ayin has to be Dafki B'derech Havdorah, not B'derech Kiruv. Because if it's B'derech Kiruv, then you'll never have a Yesh Madah, something that's the Yesh saying, I can't really figure where I come from. You'll never be able to have a as a matzah, because if Elokus Be'etzim is miskarev to something, then it must be batel. There's no such thing that Elokus Be'etzim could be karev to something and it can feel itself a yesh. And the yesh is Rachmani Nitzlan, I am a saying of an yesh. He drags the chum on 2 feet and he says, Ani v'afsi yoyed, here I am. The Eivish runs the world, the Eivish created the world, the Eivish said certain things, one of which is that Eretz Yisrael does not belong, Rachmani Nitzlan, to Goyim. Once again, certain mention, I said, we said that. So what happens to him? Trach. That's unbelievable. It's just happened time after. This guy's gone. He's had it. This latest war criminal, he's down. It's only another couple of weeks and he's resigning. He's about the 5th or the 6th. It's all gone the same way. There was President Katsav, he went the most terrible way. All of this going up. One, tick. You can't do opposite me. The man thinks, oh yes, he can. In other words, he said yes. We couldn't sign as our moms. People sign that Etzem Elokus brings about the Isavas. Nonetheless, Isavas says, oh, Shalom Aleichem, here I am. Ani v'afsi oi. But that's only mitzad the fact that it's betachlis arichot. That the Etzem is moved all legamri mea. B'china sibba b'vad no, sibba's kola. Remember, the mitis ha'oyer is also a gilui, that inyan, that how mitzad echad, it's a koyak legalis, but it's megala, and it's not megala anything. It's megala only a distant koyak to bring about inyan shuyah. Otherwise, you wouldn't have the inyan for the air. And if you have to have the inyan for tachlis ha'arichuk, in order that the air should be able to be mishave from the tachlis ha'arichuk. However, there's a inyan for tachlis ha'arichuk, which means that the Eivish is not with the yesh. As if he's not with the yesh, then how does the yesh? How does it hold out the next regga? What does the Real Torah say at the beginning of Sha'ar Yigud V'Emunah? What does it say in the first chapter of Sha'ar Yigud V'Emunah? If not the Koyach of the Eivish, in the yesh, every minute, then no yet. Which means that the inyan, the Koyach Eloki has to be mislavish b'kiruv in the yesh. It's got to hold him together every second. It's got to be nimtza boy b'chol inyono lahach yoseh lahavoseh b'isa haregah. Otherwise he's just not there. And if I come to it, in the bria by Yesh Mi'ayin, there's 2 necessities. On the one hand, it has to be betachas ha'arichuk. Otherwise, you wouldn't get the inyan of yesh. On the other hand, it's got to be betachas ha'kiruv, and it has to be in, and it has to be holding the yesh. B'chol rega. Otherwise, he just wouldn't be able to be there because ain't dover mahava esatzmei b'derech Yesh Mi'ayin konin. They can only come from the koyach achutz mimenu, which holds him. Otherwise, there's absolutely no power that he could possibly be there in the next second. Kimavur and Sha'ar Yigud in Perek Aleph Beis and Gimel and Aleph Beis Gimel. That's the 2 inyanim. That's the 2 afochim. Save me. Let me say. And if there's a mocha to the yesh, which is Davki B'derech Havdolah, B'tachlis Havdolah. And there's a mocha to the yesh, which makes, that Sibuk Ganles, ways you even come to him B'derech Kiravan Haltim. Even to the point that he can be aware of that. And he can say, oh yes, I realize that if I don't have the Koyach Elokimi, I just can't possibly exist. And to a certain extent, he can even feel the Koyach Eloki after you tell him about it, but he can't really, he doesn't necessarily identify it at the beginning as a Koyach Eloki. And if we see that in Cain, the Yesh man has got two kitzoves. It has two absolute opposites, one from the other, and that's what the Rebbe is saying here. In the Inyam and the Yisabes, there's two Inyanim, Oyer v'Shefa. And the Inyam from Oyer is the Havdolah. Whatever, everything is moved out and everything betachas Havdolah doesn't even Oyer. And that's interesting because Oyer is lost in illumination. So the Oyer Tavki B'derech Havdolah. What's the illumination in the Oyer? The illumination of the Etzem. It reveals to you the Etzem, but it doesn't reveal to you, but it reveals the Etzem, that if there's a possibility of being the Etzem Ha'isavus Mamish Mam, the Etzem Ha'isavus. Over that there should be the kiruv, that the Etzem should come down into you and enter you and hold you and be in you, even to the point of being Muragash Patecha Adam. Well, that's the Inif and Shefa. But Zebeli Zelo, Lo Yacholi Riyad. And that's the Tzayin Yanim. And that's what if you look up in Tanya, everything's written in Tanya. If you look up in Tanya, Perik Mem Tes, you'll see it over there. That's what the Alter Rebbe is Mavai. Or Perik Mem Ches, not Mem Tes. I'm sorry, Perik Mem Ches. Over the Alter Rebbe Mavai, the Zini from there, Seive. He says the Amitis is Sabbath. That's what he says. The Lashon the Amitis is Sabbath. From there, Seive. Was it there? Seive Gila Etzem. Seive means Gila Etzem. Oyer Etzem. And afterwards he says there's a Inim from Chayes Pnimi, which is Mislavish in the neighbor. And but there Zehu, he comes Kilo Lahaki Ketzasev, Yolachus V'chule. And if you look up carefully over there, you'll see that that's another Inyan in the Yisavas. The Etzem fact that he's just there, that the Etzem Inyan for the Yesh Mi'ayin, that's a Koyach HaSeive. But that he's there, but there are Kilo Hargosha, but there are Kilo of Tzelakus. Or does it mitzad the Yoram Slavish point? And that's the two Inyanim. But Ein Shum Dovish, like Nirum as Betanya, the first status, that's Nirum as in Tanya, Vagam in Shara, either Vamuna, it's also Mavua. Over there it's a little bit more difficult, a couple, the different Shara, Vamuna is probably one of the most difficult Sforim that was ever written. The first way out to follow Shari. Sehr schwer zu verchappen, aber auch upon him it is Mavua over there in Shari, Vamuna Gam. That's what the Rebbe is going to hint, that's what the Rebbe is hinting at here. It has to be those two Inyanim. Those are the Inyanim from Oyer, Gilia Etzem, Ha'oras Ha'etzem, and those are the Inyanim from Shefa. Listen, this whole difference we've been having the whole time between Oyer and Shefa, it's tempting to think, we're going to put Shefa away, because Shefa is not Shaykh and Elakuz. We're going to get into Oyer, and he's going to be Oyer. So the Rebbe said, no, Nitazah. Even in Elakuz there's also Shefa. That's Shliach. He's yoyred into a whole inyan where Ki'ilu, the Yesh has a nearness to it. Kiru. I feel Kaviyochu, Klapi de Elakus is a nearness. That way you can use certain ideas of Shefa into reaction Kaviyochu. Mit, is we're going to see that many inyanim become Mavua. The Yesh Lahari b'zeh. Barich is a gedoyle of Atzuma, but ain't kind of mochim, ain't koyach, ain't zman. Lahari was there. But it's moving, come inyanim, like we find the meaning of which brought down the meaning of Das Elin, but Das Takta in him, so mitzad echad. Yeah, we say there, we should knows everything. Who you dare, Sako. And here on the other hand, we say that the Nivus got Bechira. Yeah, Bechira Chavchi, but that's a well-known meaning what the Rambam brings in Perikei, and the rival goes to town where a day of Seder, what they're going to do it. In other words, how can I have both of them? We can design that Mitzadech the Avish knows everything, not necessarily shiny, I have Bechira Chavshi is Menaganju. So what does the Alter Rebbe say? In Torah Eretz there, and the Middle Rebbe's got a huge big relief in Pasha Teilis, in Teres Chayim, that it depends on these two inyanim. Ultimately, it depends on these two inyanim. The Mitzadini from the Seive, the Mitzadini from Siba, the Mitzadini from Oyer Amiti, the Evish knows everything. Who you dare Tako, and everything is boys, but Shum Davalo, Lo Yocholiat Nela Mimenu, Shum Bukhira, Lo Shah, Shum Davo, Hakel Bokamiko. Oh, but the athlete is saying from a Tzimtzum Rishon and a Tzimtzum Brodel Marid, and the whole air comes down, and even to Tzimtzum and Kiruvel and Ivroim are dort in them level. Dort is Kavioch, the Abish allows himself to interact with you. Yeah, there he says to you, now it's up to you, and if you make the wrong choice, you'll cop it. In other words, we're already we're in an interreactionary relationship now. It doesn't mean even Jaffa. As what says, it all depends how you're talking, and all depends how you're looking, and all depends where you're going and where you're coming, and all those in Yonim. Was it's important on Hayim Menachemav to be miyashiv at least kama dvarim of alidei this whole yisod here. Many in Yonim are mizbarim from miyashiv in Teres Achsiret. And we see it in the Teretz what he writes here. Pura Pelidik and Nakuda, what we'll say about that, I mean in the Teretz, in the original Shaila. We'll say about that tomorrow night, Be'ez Hashem. But that'll be a Hemshut to Hayim Menachemav. It's, we'll see, was it unbelievable Nakuda, what the Rebbe quetscht rein here in the Teretz, Mitzat Tzina, we've just discussed. I come again in the Teretz. 4 Tararein, where am I Nakuda? Amire, das ist die Inja. And Yesh Lema, that is one of the Inyanim, what the Rizal was Megala. So you'll have to forgive me, unfortunately I'm feeling very poor, so I'm not going to be able to stay for bringing. So I want to be tomorrow, it's very important, the last couple of days before the end of this month that I be here and I give my input and everything. But I just can't anymore. I'm very poor. Matter of fact, I actually considered not coming down to give the shit, to be quite frank. I really did. But anyway, whatever. It's suffice to say that that's one of the inyanim that the Alter Rebbe in Perek Kov is B'Machav Shem Havaya. The Alter Rebbe brings down over there the inyan from the Arizal what he said about Tzimcha. You know what the Arizal said about Tzimcha Shal Mitzvah. Tachas Hashloya Vada Hashem Lakecha B'Simcha V'Torah Miroiv Kel. And then again to this I've got the car. Just push it. You don't know the whole Taisha the Arizal on that pasuk. The Arizal said that the Simcha in one mitzvah to be more Miroiv Kel than all possible things that you can possibly imagine. The Simcha in one mitzvah is going to be greater than all. You know, isn't from the famous the Sifra, you know the story with the Rabbeinu Chaim Vital with the Arizal, isn't from the Mars with sick man. The Rabbeinu Chaim Vital asked the Arizal, how was it he was Zeicher to such Kiluim that all the other Talmud, they were also big guys, and they were the fellows that learned to say, they were big people, you know. And he said, nonetheless, we don't come even to your how do you go to your foot, to your ankles, we don't even get to your shoelaces, as the old saying has it. How were you Zeichen? What's the Zeichen given though? So I'm in Gilui, Achochmen, Gilui from Eliyahu, Anomi, and I can say, where is it in the man? So he really said, Mipnei Dova Echad. He said, Shall call mitzvah, Shahoy Sabor Yodi, Vaishi Someach Simcha Ad Ein Kates V'Tach. Simcha Shomit. But in Geffen, the ganze Shah, Shenema, was it a way, Raya, Tachas Hashaleh Vatas, Hashem Alakecha, V'Simcha V'Tur Levo, Miroiv Koil, that the Simcha, in Avadata, you have to serve the Avishim, you're serving it from Kiyam HaMitzvahs, you have to serve the Avishim, does that mean, Simcha Miroiv Koil, from all possible good that could possibly be. Just imagine anything you could possibly imagine, Gashmi Ruchni, everything you possibly imagine, the Simcha in one mitzvah. nicht der Reis von der Hemmschere, was written, what is over, a punishment, Hashim, can some say, can the Rambam runs away, the Pelitic Rambam at the end of Yochas Lula. You guys, you guys are a little bit uninformed with the whole sort of trade. A Rambam looks to be the same meaning as the Rizal, but really the Rambam saying something different. The Rizal. Anyway, what the Rizal was Machadish is that forget everything. Relationship from Gornish, you don't know any Schai, you don't know what it is, from Gornish. All you know is that the Eibishter, he gave you a tzivui. He told you to do this. What could be more amazing than their Atzvus ain't saying, their Sibus Korasibes, he gave you this little thing to do. Oh, yeah, the little mensch and Atzvus ain't safe get together. That's the Rizal. Up until the real Nishivan Adam Mitzot. Adam Mitzot Tzach. The Golem. Adam Mitzot. A purpose. The Rizal start off. It's and that's the Rebbe. The Rebbe says, listen, you guys forget it. The Atzvus is there. You guys have all been mishkashi in the Atzvus. All the Yidden have finished it. They've all done it. You know, Atzvus, mit the Yidden, forget everything. Just laws of Palamas and just say, we want Moshiach now. The Father, Rebbe is him, from there. Good. Thank you.